There's a story told of a weary traveler that arrived one day late in the afternoon at the bank of a river. He needed to cross to get to the other side where he would spend the night, but there was no bridge for him to cross. Luckily, it happened to be wintertime, and it appeared that the ice on the river was frozen, but he was uncertain of how solid the ice was. He was fearful and afraid to cross it. He waited for a while, hoping that one of the locals would come and assure him that it was all right, but no one came. As evening was drawing to a close, he decided that he better try to make it across to the other side. Still being fearful and afraid, he decided that if he happened to be on his knees and his hands, perhaps it would better distribute the weight. And so he got down onto the ice and began very slowly to make his way across. He listened very carefully for any noise or crack. And as he reached about the midway point, he stopped in exhaustion. He was physically exhausted from the slow pace, but more so emotionally exhausted because of his worry of whether or not he would make it safely across. As he took a moment to catch his breath, in the far distance he could hear some noise, and he could hear some singing. As he slowly shifted his body to look far down, he could see what seemed to be a carriage and a buggy and 4 horses as they were plowing across the river, and the driver was merrily singing to himself. At that moment, the weary traveler realized that the ice surely was strong enough to support him, that he didn't have to crawl and be cautious, and that in fact all of his fear and paranoia was for naught. He was able to pick himself up, quickly walk across to the other side, and to find his place of lodging for the night. I think in many ways how both of these men approached crossing the river that day are ultimately a paradigm of how it is that we oftentimes approach life itself. Oftentimes in the midst of our life journey, we are filled with a sense of fear and trepidation of what lies on the other side. And sometimes this fear can cause us to be paralyzed. At other times, it can cause us to be slow in acting. And at other times, it causes us to not know what to do. But there are also moments in our lives when we can be filled with a sense of faith and trust, and that we can be bold in what we are doing and where we are going because we know that we are safe. Ultimately, at the heart of our lives, especially our lives of faith, we are called to be bold and courageous. We are called to be trusting in God and know that He is there to take care of us, to bring us to that place of refuge and safety. And in our gospel today, we hear about 2 people that also had that same type of faith, even in the midst of the storms of life that they were experiencing, and how they turned their faith and trust to Jesus. And because they turned their faith and trust to Him, not remaining paralyzed in what they were experiencing, they received blessing and newness of life. We hear that as Jesus approaches the other side of the sea, a large crowd is already gathered before Him. And one of the people that is there is Jairus, one of the leading officials of the synagogue. His daughter is deathly ill, and he knows that the only person that will be able to save her, to heal her, is Jesus. He is willing to risk his reputation. He is willing to risk his place in the synagogue. He is willing to risk anything in order to bring healing and restoration to his daughter. And so, with a sense of boldness, with a sense of expectation, with a sense of trust, he simply kneels before Jesus and begs to Him to heal his daughter. And we hear that Jesus is moved with a sense of compassion. Of course, He wants to heal this little girl. And he and Jairus begin walking towards his house. But as they are making that journey, Jairus received word that it is too late. His daughter has already died, not to bother the teacher. Jesus overhears this and knows what he desires to do, to not only bring healing to his daughter, but newness of life. And as Jesus approaches the house, as he goes to the bedroom of the little girl, we hear the tenderness, the intimacy of how he approaches her. He gently takes her hand. He almost as whispers in her ear, using his own language of Aramaic, Talitha kum, little girl, get up. And all of a sudden, she who was dead is now alive. And all of this happened because her father had the boldness to be able to reach out to Jesus without counting the cost. He was willing to do whatever it was that was necessary to be able to save his daughter. And because of that, this little girl received a second chance and newness of life. In the midst of this rising of Jairus' daughter, we also hear about another woman that was in need of healing. This time a woman who had experienced hemorrhaging for the past 12 years of her life. And despite spending all that she had seeking experts and medical help, nothing seemed to help. She was now at a worse point than when she first began. And not only did she experience great physical pain because of the disease, moreover, she experienced a great sense of isolation and loneliness. For having a blood disease meant in her day and age that she was ritually impure. It meant she could no longer live at home. She could no longer be with her family and friends. She could no longer work in the community or to go to the synagogue, for she was impure. But in the midst of all that she was going through, she too knew that there was only one person that could bring about healing and restoration for her. And regardless of what the cost, she was going to search out Jesus and seek that healing. But she was also well aware of all of the rules associated with her ritual impurity. She knew that she could not see Jesus face to face, but her faith was so deep in what she believed Jesus could do. She thought, even if I can touch the fringe of his cloak, I can be healed. And so with boldness, with determination, with persistence, regardless of what others would think or do, she reached out to touch Jesus. And what happens? She is healed instantaneously. And when confronted by Jesus, he commends her for her deep and abiding faith. And so because of this persistence, because of this dedication, because of this boldness, both Jairus' daughter and the woman who was hemorrhaging receive a second chance and new life. And as such, they model for us how it is that we are called to live our lives of faith. We are called, especially in the midst of the storms and the difficulties of life, whether it be our own, in the lives of our family and friends, in the life of the world, not to be fearful and afraid, to think that we have to go about crawling cautiously for fear that we may perish. But instead, we are called to be bold. We are called to be courageous. We are called to be able to be persistent and to be able to beg and to reach out to Jesus for the healing, for the strength that we or that our loved ones need. Imagine if Jairus didn't have that boldness of heart, his daughter would not have been raised from the dead. Imagine if the woman of hemorrhaging had not touched the fringe of Jesus' cloak, she would not have been healed. But because of their boldness, because of their faith, because of their courage and expectation, they received the healing that they and their loved ones needed. And the same is true for us, that as we look at our individual lives, as we look at the lives of our family and friends, as we look at what is happening in our world today, we are called with that same boldness as Jairus and the woman to be able to beg and to reach out to Jesus. Whether it is for physical healing, emotional or relational healing, spiritual healing, Jesus desires to reach out and to touch us like he did to the little girl. But we simply need to make that first step, and that he will do the rest. And so as we celebrate our Eucharist this evening, let us pray for that desire to have a holy sense of boldness, that we will have a courage and a desire to be able to turn to the Lord, especially in the midst of our needs, in the midst of our storms of life, and to beg him to heal us, to restore us, to give us newness of life, a second chance, and a new beginning.